All right, continuing with our unit on building blocks. These are building blocks of cells. What are the parts of the cells, the macromolecules that cells need to function? First of all, let's talk about carbon. Carbon atoms have 4 electrons in their outer shell, which you'll understand a lot more in chemistry next year. But because they have these 4 outer electrons, they are able to form strong bonds with many other elements. Hydrogen, oxygen, phosphorus, sulfur, and nitrogen. These are all elements that are essential to life. But the main one is carbon. Carbon atoms can also bond to each other. So they can form tons of different structures. Carbon-carbon bonds can be single, double, or triple covalent bonds. We'll get back to those later. And then chains of carbon atoms can even close up on themselves to form rings, like you see here with benzene. These macromolecules, or giant molecules, as you see here, are made from thousands or even hundreds of thousands of smaller molecules. They're formed by a process called polymerization, where large compounds are built by joining smaller ones together. If you think of Legos, you have a bunch of different Lego blocks and you put them together to construct a house. The polymer is the house, and then the building blocks, obviously, are the Legos themselves. So the smaller units, or the individual Legos, are called monomers, and like I said, the structure that you're building is called a polymer. These monomers can be identical or they can be different within a macromolecule. So there are 4 major groups of macromolecules: carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids, and proteins. Nucleic acids are going to get their own unit when we talk about DNA later on in the semester. So right now we're just going to focus on carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Carbohydrates are made up of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, usually in a ratio of 1 to 2 to 1. Carbohydrates are the main source of energy for living things. The breakdown of sugars gives immediate energy for cell activities. Plants, some animals, and other organisms also use carbs for structure. Many organisms store their extra sugar as starch. The monomers in starch polymers are sugar, like glucose. So starch is made up of really long chains of glucose hooked together. A single sugar molecule is called a monosaccharide. So we have glucose, there's also galactose, another monosaccharide, and fructose, which is found in many fruits. Table sugar is called sucrose. It's a disaccharide that's made by joining glucose and fructose together. The large macromolecules that are formed from these monosaccharides are called polysaccharides. That's what starch is. Animals store excess sugar in a polysaccharide called glycogen, and actually stored in the liver. There's glycogen also that's stored in your muscles. When it's broken down into glucose, then it's able to be used for energy, to have muscles contract. Plants use starch to store excess sugar. They also, very important, have a polysaccharide called cellulose. It gives plants their strength and rigidity. Cellulose is what plant cell walls are made of. On to lipids. Lipid is the fancy word for fat. So they're made of carbon and hydrogen atoms, and they are not soluble. They don't dissolve in water. The categories of lipids are fats, oils, and waxes, and they are used for energy storage. We also talked about how they're part of the cell membrane. We have the phospholipid bilayer, the cell membrane, and waterproof coverings as well. Steroids synthesized by the body are lipids. Some examples of steroids are hormones. The building blocks of lipids, the monomers, are a little bit more complicated here. It's a glycerol and three fatty acids. So we have the glycerol here in the yellowish orange, and then we have the 3 fatty acids in blue. If each carbon atom in a fatty acid chain is joined to another by a single bond, the lipid is said to be saturated. These are the fats that are bad for you. If there is at least one carbon-carbon double bond, the fatty acid is said to be unsaturated. If there's more than one double bond, that lipid is called polyunsaturated. As a rule, lipids that are unsaturated, like olive oil, are liquid at room temperature. You can see how the degree of unsaturation, the number of double bonds, affects the melting point. So, number of double bonds for stearic acid is 0, the melting point is 69.6. That's pretty high, degrees Celsius. Oleic acid has 1 double bond, now it's 14 degrees Celsius. Linoleic acid, the double bond is 2 minus 5 degrees Celsius, is the melting point, so where it turns from a solid to a liquid. And then linolenic acid has 3 double bonds, now the melting point is minus 11 degrees Celsius, where it turns from a solid to a liquid. And finally, the last macromolecule we're going to talk about today, proteins. They contain nitrogen, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And their building blocks are called amino acids. I have a little rhyme that I use for proteins. Growth and repair. This is gonna sum up the bottom paragraph here. Growth and repair, bone, muscle, hair. Those two rhyme. And then I have to tack on enzymes at the end. So, rate of reactions is the enzyme thing. Cellular structures, growth and repair, transporting substances into and out of cells, helping to fight disease. Amino acids have 2 different ends to them. They have an amino group, which is NH2. You can see that right here. That's at one end, and a carboxyl group, which is COOH, on the other end, right here. In the middle is a single carbon, and this group that will change. It's called the R group. So in alanine, it's CH3. In serine, it's CH2OH. When these are joined together, these 2 amino acids, it's called a peptide bond. Like I said on the previous slide, all amino acids, they are identical, in the amino and carboxyl groups. They can be joined together by a peptide bond between the amino and carboxyl groups. So you see these joining together right here. The amino and carboxyl groups turn into a peptide bond. As I said before as well, the difference is the R group in the middle. Lots of different properties. There are 20 different amino acids that are found in nature. Proteins, as a result, are among the most diverse macromolecules. Proteins have 4 levels of structure. The primary structure is the sequence of its amino acids. Secondary structure is how those amino acids kind of fold around each other. tertiary structure is the complete three-dimensional arrangement of a polypeptide chain. And then proteins that have more than one chain have a quaternary or fourth level of structure, how the polypeptide chains are arranged with respect to each other. Hemoglobin, which carries oxygen, consists of 4 subunits.